Hello everyone and welcome to a video that is long overdue, and that is a full guide on the technical aspects of Victoria 2 multiplayer. How to host it, how it works, fixing problems, showing you how and why we do things in the multiplayer community. This is not a guide to game mechanics or multiplayer strategies, those will certainly come in future tutorials. I believe that Vic 2 multiplayer can be a great, thrilling experience that pretty much no other game can replicate, definitely not its sequel. On this channel I've shown you some of the great stories that you can experience in Vic 2 multiplayer, the glorious highs and the terrible lows. What I've also shown on this channel is the notorious instability of Vic 2 multiplayer. You've seen people getting stuck in the lobby, you've seen crashes, you've seen out of syncs, and you've seen us trying to deal with the pain of all that by creating songs about them.
Out of sync, out of sync, out of sync, sync, out of sync, out of sync, out of sync.
Key's still stuck in the lobby, Key's still stuck in the lobby.
You're out of sync. You're out of sync.
You've also seen some potentially confusing aspects like rules and complicated mod features. When it comes to all the topics of this video, I'm not just going to explain basic procedures or give you a checklist, I'm going to explain how everything works and why we do the things we do so you get a deep understanding, with plenty of the usual jokes and gags and petty swipes at Victoria 3 so it's not boring. Hosting and getting into Victoria 2 multiplayer isn't that complicated, but it's not quite like a game where you simply press a multiplayer button and join match very quickly. And I know very well that these weird procedures and the confusion as to how Victoria 2 multiplayer works are a big barrier for people getting into it and put off a lot of new players. New players naturally assume that it's the game mechanics that they need to focus on learning and focus on asking about, but learning all these technical things is just as important, because if you can't join a multiplayer game in the first place, you won't be able to experience what is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to learn, which is to just play multiplayer so you can learn from more experienced players, asking questions, learning from your mistakes. I've seen new players stumble at the first hurdle of installing a mod and getting the right checksum, and sadly seen them being berated for it by experienced players, but after watching this guide you'll be able to do that with no problem. So if you show up to your first ever multiplayer game after watching this guide with the mod correctly installed, ready to be the first person to join in every rehost,
you'll go far.
It's not just completely new players who are going to benefit from this guide. There's aspects in here that even more experienced players probably didn't know about, like how to edit out a glitched crisis. But most of all, I want this video to be easy to navigate, so you can use it as a quick reference for the specific piece of information you're looking for, and you can do that through the way I've ordered the video. I'm going to start with the absolute basics and explain how to host and play in Victoria 2 multiplayer, everything you should set up before hosting or joining your lobby. Then I'm going to talk about how Victoria 2 multiplayer actually functions, the tools you have at your disposal, methods of communication such as in-game chat, how to find players and how campaigns are typically organised. I'll also give you an overview of some of the important additions we make in the multiplayer community and the reasons that we have to add them. For example, rules that prevent exploits. And then the third and probably most important section will be the numerous technical problems of Vic 2 multiplayer, what they are, why they happen, how to identify them, troubleshoot them, fix them and get through them. And of course, if you want to navigate very quickly to the relevant topic that you need, you can use the navigation panel at the bottom of the video, or go to the description where all the timestamps for the relevant topics are. The video is divided up into the 3 main numbered topics, and within those lots of different topics marked by a letter. This video took a lot of time, effort and research to make, more than I actually thought it would, meaning that I missed out on a few weeks of normal uploads to do this. And I could have milked this as well, I could have split this up into loads of different videos, but I've committed to putting it all in one video, for better or for worse. You can support me on Patreon or give a super thanks in the comments, or join the channel membership and all that. Please do like the video, especially if you want more tutorials. And I'd like to give a special thanks to the people that helped me make this video, either with their experience and knowledge or their lack of experience and knowledge as a new player, to tell me if the video helped them, which it did. These people all kept me right and helped me to completely redo or amend many of the sections in this video so that they were accurate and correct. Anyway, enough of the long intro, on to the first section. The first thing I'm going to explain to you in this video is how to activate windowed borderless. It comes before everything else because it makes doing everything else a lot easier. It means you can have Victoria 2 in full screen and normal resolution, while also being able to access other applications and tabs much quicker. So not only does it improve quality of life when you're actually playing the game, it means you can do all the setups in this entire tutorial quicker as well. Windowed borderless exists in Victoria 2, but a lot of people aren't aware of that because the in-game option for it doesn't work and you have to do a workaround in your settings file. To truly activate windowed borderless for Victoria 2, you navigate to your Vic 2 Documents folder under Paradox Interactive. Every different mod you have has its own settings file. If you go to the settings file just in your Vic 2 directory, you'll be changing the settings for vanilla Victoria 2, which is fine if that's what you want to do, but if you want to do it for the mod you're using, go into the mod folder. Open the settings file in a text editor such as Notepad. Now, even if you've gone into the video settings in-game and switched it to borderless, this is what the settings file will still look like. All you have to do is change full screen from yes to no and then save the settings file. That's it. Full screen no, borderless yes. Now when you launch up that mod again, or vanilla Victoria 2 if that's the setting you changed, you'll have windowed borderless enabled. For multiplayer this is very useful because it allows you to tab out, message other players, move around into different channels on Discord. If you have Victoria 2 in a regular full screen and you attempt to alt tab, that could crash your game. But that doesn't really happen with borderless on. So you want to play Victoria 2 with more than one person. Just you and the voices in your head doesn't cut it anymore. You need another player. So whether it's just you and one other player, or 5 other players, or a full multiplayer lobby of 20 other players, you need one person to be the host. Victoria 2 is a game that does not have servers for multiplayer. It is peer-to-peer connection. Everyone connects to one player who is the host. So before you even attempt to set up a lobby and have players join, the host needs to be ready to accept players. There are 2 main methods to be able to host Victoria 2 multiplayer. The first method, which is the traditional method, which you might find older tutorials mainly focusing on, is the private network, or virtual private network. The second method, which has gained favour over the first method, and is superior for reasons that I will tell you, is the port forwarding method. A big downside of the private network method is that every player who wants to join has to do this. Every single player has to download the third-party software, therefore by default a huge positive of port forwarding is that only the host has to deal with it. But on the other hand, there are some people who will not be able to port forward. You need to have full control over your internet router, which is not possible in many circumstances. For example, university accommodation, or if you live with your parents and they have parental controls on the internet, let alone letting you access the router. But that point is well accounted for by the fact that you only need one person to host. Out of any group you'll probably find one person who can port forward, at least. I'd just like to point out that it's good to have more than one person that can host in any given game, so that you have a backup in case anything happens with the first host. But perhaps the biggest upside for port forwarding is that it's simply more stable and has a better connection than Hamachi at least. Hamachi is the network that has been by far the most used by the Victoria 2 community. It's the one that I know about and have experience with, and that goes for the vast majority of players that I've ever known and talked to, and we simply know from experience that port forwarding is by far more stable. If you can find another virtual private network software that's free, works really well and is more stable than port forwarding, more power to you. There might be some really good ones out there that are also really secure, but I suspect that the good ones aren't free, or they have a free version that's limited in terms of its features. For example, the free version of Hamachi has a maximum network cap of 5 people, so that's really not great for hosting Victoria 2 games with more than 5 people. We had to set up multiple networks, and the host had to be in each of them. Really tedious. Port forwarding, on the other hand, is a feature included in your router with your internet service provider that you or your family are already paying for, although there might actually be some very rare cases of ISPs that don't allow this. If you can port forward, there's no arbitrary limit on the amount of people who can connect to you. If you pay for an internet package, you've already been paying for the privilege of port forwarding, you just haven't used it yet. There goes all my sponsorship opportunities with any VPN. A potential downside is that your IP address will be known by the players that you're hosting for. Now this is a really complicated topic, but it's absolutely nothing to worry about 99.9% of the time. The way I'm about to talk about it is going to make it sound much more scary than it actually is, but I have to talk about it to be complete in this guide. What I'll say is this: it's up to you if you want to port forward and host Victoria 2 multiplayer. And if you don't want your IP address to be known by the people you're going to be hosting for, those people by the way could range from just a few of your friends who you trust to more questionable individuals, then just don't do it and become a normal player who isn't a host. I personally barely know anything about networks or security threats or DDoSing, but if you're going to share your IP, then I recommend you do learn about it and learn what the potential risks are so you can make an educated decision. That's all I'll say on that matter. There's probably a lot more aspects to this, probably a lot more points one could make, but that really about covers it. I'm completely open to the idea that there might be a really good private network software out there that offers all you need for a Victoria 2 game in a free version or something, but port forwarding is right there in front of us and it's really easy. And who's to say that private networks don't have their own security issues? Anyway, in the next section I will explain how to port forward. If you already know how to port forward, then the ports you need to forward are on the screen. They're 1630 to 1641 TCP and UDP. If you know that you will not have access to your router, then there's no point, you will not be able to port forward. Also, this entire guide is on the basis of using Windows, particularly Windows 10. For other Windows operating systems, everything should be very similar. If you don't use Windows and some of the things in this video don't apply to you, then you're going to have to look up different guides or try and work things out on your own, but you're probably already used to that. The way you do this is through the admin settings of your router, or as Americans like to say, router. which is this little box that gives you internet. The specifics on how this is done will differ from internet service provider to internet service provider, and may even differ from router to router. But generally it's the same. If you struggle to do it from my guide, then I recommend looking up specific tutorials for your internet service provider. To access these settings, open any internet browser and enter your default gateway. To locate your default gateway, open the Windows command line and type ipconfig, one word, all lowercase, hit enter and it will come up in that list. It's the default gateway of whichever connection you use to get to the internet, whether that be an Ethernet or wireless. So if you got that right and make it onto your router's admin page, you'll then be asked to enter the password to your router, which in most cases is a basic default password such as admin. Alternatively, as is the case in my router, it's an actual password which is located on the router next to the Wi-Fi name and password. Whatever it is, you should be able to easily find out just by looking up your own internet service provider and router. So once you reach your router's admin page, locate the port forwarding setting. Now, there might not be a specific section or setting called port forwarding. It could be under a different heading like firewall or NAT. When you've got that, the ports that you have to open are on the thumbnail of the video. They're right here again. They are 1630 to 1641, both TCP and UDP. When you host a Victoria 2 multiplayer lobby, the IP address that people will be connecting to is your public IP address. You can find that very easily just by googling what is my IP address. After you've forwarded your ports, I'd recommend testing it. You'll need to ask another person to join a lobby that you host. If you still don't know how to do that, then just wait for the relevant section about hosting and joining lobbies. I'm pleased to report that during the making of this guide, I got my own port forwarding to work with no troubleshooting required. It gives me hope that that'll happen to most of you as well. Either way, if you find that something's wrong and your port forwarding apparently hasn't worked, the main source of troubleshooting for this is your firewall settings. This is where troubleshooting really begins, and it gets rather complicated, and lots of people have lots of different problems and potential fixes. You might even have to contact your internet service provider, but this fix works a lot of the time. So go to your Windows firewall and click on Allow an app or feature through Windows Defender Firewall. Then you'll get a list of loads of different applications on your computer, and you tick the box for Victoria 2 if it wasn't ticked. If that still doesn't work, try going into your advanced settings and creating your own rules to allow Victoria 2 inbound and outbound through your firewall. When it prompts you to select a program, that would mean going into your installation directory and selecting v2game.exe. Another potential thing to look at is the firewall and network protection section in your settings. Make sure the type of network you have active is a private network. Apparently turning this Windows Defender Firewall off is a potential fix. That's just what I've heard. I still have this on and it works for me. The last thing that could be interfering with your connection to Victoria 2 players is any third-party antivirus or firewall that you have. Check your settings and make sure that's not blocking any Victoria 2 connections. There you go, that's all I've got on port forwarding. On to the next sections. So that's it then, you've either forwarded the relevant ports for hosting, or you're in a private network with the people who want to join you. You can now host a game. In order for this to actually work, every player needs to have the same checksum. This is a 4-letter code that is in the bottom left of the main menu of Victoria 2. In order to connect to a multiplayer game together, every player needs to have the same one. The checksum represents the version of the game you're using and the mods you're using. Each different version or mod will have its own checksum. The one that you see on the screen right now is base Victoria 2 with both expansions, House Divided and Heart of Darkness, both of which you really need. No mods are active, and version 3.04 is the last version of Victoria 2. WNVU is the default checksum for Victoria 2. If this is wrong for you, then any mod that you install on top of that will also be wrong. So if you've got the wrong default checksum, then you should verify integrity of game files on Steam, which is done by right-clicking the game in your Steam library and clicking Properties and then Local Files. Or if you didn't get it on Steam, reinstall the game. If you're not interested in playing with any mods, then you can just hop in and play on vanilla like that with that checksum. That's absolutely fine if you're new and the choice of mods seems overwhelming to you. But if you would like to play while using a mod, for example, a mod like HPM that adds flavour, an alternate history mod to explore a completely different world, or a mod that adds utilities and balance changes for more competitive multiplayer, which is what I'm going to introduce you to in the multiplayer mods introduction section later in the video, then you will first have to download the mod, and that can be found on a variety of sources: ModDB, your local Discord, a friend sending you the one that they want to play, the Paradox Victoria 2 forums. However you find and download the mod that you want to play in multiplayer, and whether you download the thing directly or whether it's a .zip file, or whether you download it from a GitHub where you can see various versions and how people are working on it. If you're downloading a mod intended for multiplayer, it will probably say the checksum somewhere near the download to help you. Your download should consist of two things: the folder of the mod itself and a .mod file corresponding to the name of the mod. Take these two items and go to the installation directory of Victoria 2. My installation directory looks like this because I have the game on Steam, but on my SSD instead of my big main hard drive where all my other games are, so I can launch it quicker and rehost, and I recommend that to everyone else as well if it's possible for you. So put the folder of the mod and the .mod file into the mod folder in your Victoria 2 directory. Every mod will go there. So when you've successfully put the mod into the mod folder, when you launch Victoria 2, it should show up as a box to tick in the launcher. Double click to tick the box of the mod that you want to play, turn your volume down and then launch it. Now here's the really important part. When you launch a mod for the first time, it will take longer to load, but on the first load of a mod, the checksum will be wrong. You have to load it again to get the correct checksum. For example, I just loaded Trail of Cans here for the first time, but if you recall from when I showed you the GitHub page, it said what the checksum should be, and it's not the same. So let's try closing it and launching it again to see what happens. When you launch the mod again, it should load up a lot faster this time, but I'll skip through most of the loading through editing anyway. And there it is, I have the right checksum, so I can now join a multiplayer lobby of this mod. God help me. There's another point here which is a very common pitfall for new players. It's important that you learn this. Whenever you actually load into the game, and this could be single player or multiplayer, and then you resign from the game and go back to the menu, the checksum will have changed. That also applies to this halfway house menu between the lobby and the game, where you click abandon game to leave. The checksum will also change from here. During every rehost in Victoria 2 multiplayer from in-game or this halfway menu, you have to fully restart the game. Close the actual application. In multiplayer, as a rule of thumb, you never resign, you always quit all the way to the desktop. If you've only been in the multiplayer lobby and you have to rehost or rejoin, you can just click back and go back to the main menu and rejoin it without going to desktop, with one exception that I'll talk about in the getting stuck in the lobby section. But if you actually see the game's map in-game, then you have to always quit. Like I said, get Vicky 2 on your SSD if you have one. If you experience any issues with your checksum or maybe the game crashing while it's loading, then go into the Victoria 2 directory in your documents, which is different from your main Victoria 2 directory. In there you'll find the folder of every Victoria 2 mod you've ever installed, including the one that you want to use. So go into the relevant one, go to the map folder and delete the cache folder. Deleting your map cache will revert your mod to its original wrong checksum, by the way, so this will lead to you requiring another mod restart. Then you'll be fine. To uninstall a mod, just delete the .mod file and the mod folder that's in your mod directory. To get a new version of the mod, just delete your current version, download the new version and put it in that folder. If you run into any more checksum problems, try reinstalling the mod. Maybe delete all of your mods and then just install the one you're going to use. Or, as I said earlier, verify integrity of game files on Steam or reinstall your game completely. Before you host and play a Victoria 2 multiplayer game, you need to activate monthly auto-saving. So on the main menu, go to Options, Game, and change the autosave interval to monthly, which is the quickest possible interval, and hit Apply. Warning, this setting does not carry over to every mod that you play. Every time you install a new mod, make sure to turn this on again. The reason for monthly autosaves is Victoria 2 in multiplayer tends to crash quite often. When an individual player crashes and you need to rehost, the host can take a save there and then. When the host crashes, another player can take a save and send it to the host, but sometimes everyone crashes, including the host and all the players. In that case, all you have to go with was the most recent autosave. If monthly autosaves are on, the worst case scenario is going back to the start of the month that you were in. If they weren't on, you might be reverting months of in-game time, which is terrible. Also, reverting to the monthly autosave is necessary when a player carries out an action that needs to be undone. For example, transferring away half their country, releasing all possible releasable nations in Rage. You get the idea. Unfortunately, this means that every month there is a little bit of lag as the host takes that autosave. It's something that you just get used to and you need to do it or else you'll end up reverting massive amounts of time. As for save games in general, it's something that whoever's hosting the game needs to pay attention to. They're located in your Victoria 2 documents directory. Each different mod that you use has its own save games folder. When you take a new save in-game, a new file will appear in this folder. They're a file type called .v2, but they are just a text file that contains all the information about your save. The naming convention is the name of the country of whoever took the save, and then the date. Also, each month a new autosave will be created, only by the host of the multiplayer lobby, by the way. You actually get the previous 3 months worth of autosaves, then they start overriding each other. When you're rehosting an ongoing campaign, you host the lobby and then go up to the top left and select the save that you're going to use. Make sure that you select the save before inviting other players to join the lobby. It can get really messy if anyone joins the lobby before you've loaded the save or while you're loading the save. Then when players join, they will start downloading the save in the lobby with a percentage progress. Alternatively, if a player joins the lobby while already having the save in their save games folder, after downloading it from Discord, they will just be at 100% immediately. Keep in mind that you can do that because there are some situations where it's necessary. As a host, you will often need to send the save game to the players or upload it to a Discord channel, and you'll probably need to compress the save before you do that to a .zip or a .rar, just keep that in mind. As you can see in this example, the host is also carrying out edits to the saves between sessions of the game. That's kind of advanced, but it just consists of going into the save game in a text editor, as I showed you, and then making whatever changes you need to make, like giving a player a bit of infamy if they've been naughty. Do not make changes to a save that you're going to use in multiplayer by opening it in single player and, for instance, using console commands to change things around. If you ever need to make changes to a save, you're going to have to edit it in the text editor. This is because if you open the save in single player, the AI will start making moves, even if you don't unpause it. I think you understand how save games work now, and you've been introduced to some advanced stuff that I'm not really going to teach you about in any detail in this video, with one exception, which is how to edit out a glitched crisis in the troubleshooting section. So now I'll show you how to host the lobby as a host and join the lobby as a player, and explain and show you how to fix all the problems when you cannot connect. So as a host or a player, click on multiplayer, make sure you set your username, don't ever go into a lobby while being called player. For hosts, the name of your game doesn't matter, that can be anything. And that's it, you're hosting. Assuming you've done everything correctly in the connection section, port forwarding or joining a network, and the mods and checksum section. All the players should have the same checksum as you. So if you're a player and you want to join the game, you go to the multiplayer menu and you select Join Internet Game. You now get to the screen asking you to enter the IP address. This will of course be the IP address of the host, who should know what that is by googling what is my IP address. If you're using a network, it will be the IP address of the host within that network. The network will have assigned everyone in it a local address, but if you're doing the port forwarding method and it's the host's real IP address, obviously the host should tell all the players his IP address privately, for example in a Discord channel that only the players have access to. Bear in mind that copying and pasting doesn't work in this text box, so you have to type it correctly. A rather common pitfall is to simply type the IP address wrong. Just be thankful it's not an IPv6 address, so double check that, and as long as nobody is streaming, you can read out the IP to help people type it in. Also, if you're the one streaming, don't ever show this menu. I always hide it when I stream, obviously. If you've done everything correctly up until this point, you should of course be able to join the lobby, and that's that. However, I will now explain the various reasons for clicking the join button and you not being able to join. So what are the potential problems? The most common error message you will get is game not found. The game can't find a multiplayer lobby that it can connect to with that IP address that you typed in. This could mean that you typed the IP address incorrectly, the host is unable to host you to a port forwarding problem or a private network problem, or maybe you attempted to join while the host is rehosting the lobby. Communication is of course really important here for the host to tell people when he's hosting. Something you should know is that when this happens, it takes absolutely ages before the error message shows up. It will attempt to join the game for about 60 seconds, and trust me, that feels like a very long time, especially when people are shouting at you to hurry up and join the lobby. Your Victoria 2 application may also start not responding during this time. It might actually crash, but it probably won't crash. The other common error message that you can get at this point is the host has another version of the game. This is a checksum problem, so if you have a different checksum from the host, that could be a different version of your mod. It could be as simple as someone not having the DLC for Victoria 2, Heart of Darkness and House Divided, both of which you simply need and everyone should have them. It also means you might have missed out on the correct steps, such as restarting your game to get the right checksum. Maybe you're doing a rehost and you hit resign instead of quitting out of the game completely, in which case the checksum would change. I'm just reiterating what I said in the checksum and mod section. If you've done all of that correctly, then you should be fine. Shout out to the last error message you can get here, which is very uncommon, and it means that another player in the lobby already has your name. I think I remember seeing cases where people either lose connection to the lobby or the game crashes and they try to rejoin, but their past instance is somehow still in the lobby, so the host just needs to kick that past version of that person so they can join the lobby properly. So if that worked and every player is making their way into the lobby, then that's it, you're ready to play. Just be ready to do that process over and over again, because you will need to rehost. It's at this point, hosting the lobby with all the players joining, that everyone needs to do what is known as their checks. There's a topic called getting stuck in the lobby in the troubleshooting section, which has more details on that. One last thing that I highly recommend you set up as you get into a multiplayer game is your notification settings. You have a great degree of control over what events or happenings in Victoria 2 will appear as a notification pop-up on your screen. You can only change these settings from in the game itself. You can't do it in the main menu. When you're in the game, press escape to open the menu, and instead of going to game options, you go to message settings. This interface is a bit of a mess, but I'm going to direct you to the two settings in particular that you'll want to change for multiplayer away from how they are by default. First of all, you'll probably want a notification when another country is mobilizing, and secondly, you'll definitely want a notification whenever you get attacked by enemy forces in a war. I don't have to delve much into talking about game mechanics, which is beyond the scope of this video, for you to get the idea of why that's important. As you can see, the different messages are arrayed in different categories, but the search bar is the easiest way to do it, so start typing mobilize into that search bar. You don't have to type the whole word, just hit enter, then you see all the potential notifications regarding mobilization. The one that you will want to change is when another mobilize in preparation of war. Now, I've already enabled this, and there are many mods in which it will be enabled by default. The 2 boxes that I've highlighted should be green. There are 2 of them because there are these categories called interesting and other. After years of playing Victoria 2, I didn't even know until I made this guide that you can set countries to interesting and not interesting by right-clicking their flag, but I recommend just turning interesting and other on anyway. For the second setting that I'd recommend changing, search for attacked. It's when one of our land units is attacked by the enemy, and for me it's already on there. Put them both on just to be sure. Once again, you have different settings for every mod, so you have to do this again if you get a new mod. Also, you can change them in single player, and they will apply to multiplayer. Those are the 2 settings that I would consider essential that I've shown you, but now that you know how to change these settings, you can do other ones to your own liking. For example, maybe also when a country demobilizes, so you don't have to panic anymore. Now you're definitely esports ready. So you want to play multiplayer, and after watching the guide so far, you know how to host or join a multiplayer game, but there's one slight problem. You don't have anyone to play with. I can't give you a massive comprehensive guide on how to find players. It should be possible if you have real people skills, but what I'm going to do in this little section here is just point you in the right direction and give you some examples of good places to find them. Now obviously, since this is my video, I should publicise my own Discord of course, but I genuinely think it's a great place to find other players. I have the Victoria 2 multiplayer Discords channel, which is where I show as many different communities and Discords that host Victoria 2 multiplayer as possible. I can't keep track of absolutely everything myself, but the channel is as exhaustive as I can possibly make it. It's a community effort, so it can only include the server owners that actually tell me that they exist, and it can only get rid of the inactive ones when people tell me they're inactive. Another place that you might find some players is the multiplayer section on Victoria 2 on the Paradox forum, the Victoria 2 Reddit, and maybe even the Victoria 2 Steam discussions, who knows. If you're completely new and you're looking for communities to play Vic 2 in, never be afraid to just go and ask in the channels of any of these communities. Just let them know that you're a new player. Some games accept new players, some games don't, but there's only one way to find out. Some Vic 2 campaigns and communities advertise themselves as new player friendly, so look out for those. One of the major ways in which new players can learn the game without having too much of an investment in a multiplayer campaign is by substituting, which is to play a nation for one session when the actual permanent player on that nation can't make it. A very common thing in organised Vic 2 games, and it's very accessible. In a proper multiplayer game as a new player, it's better to go on small countries so that you can play, but if you fail, the stakes aren't so high for the overall campaign, and a game balance is maintained. A long time ago, I actually hosted a new player specific campaign on my Discord with a set of really experienced players playing very small countries to aid and guide the new players who were playing most of the countries, including the Great Powers. Each time the new players fought each other in a war, I would make sure that each side had one experienced player coaching them and telling them what to do. That campaign was a massive success, and the players learned a lot and everyone had fun. I'm mentioning how we did that campaign now because I think it's a really good template for other new player friendly campaigns that can be done in the future. Another example of a campaign sort of like that was a Nurse Reno campaign that I played and streamed as the Netherlands. More experienced players were on secondary powers and the Great Powers were filled by newer players. That campaign was a massive success as well. So hopefully you have a better idea of where to find some multiplayer campaigns and a really good approach for what new players should look for. I'm going to give you an overview of the general way in which Victoria 2 multiplayer is organised and scheduled. It can be very fun to just play casually for a few hours and get through a few years of in-game time, but if you actually want to traverse the decades of Victoria 2, make it to the late game and enjoy the full experience that it has to offer, and fight great wars after building up your country for so long, with the consistency of having the same players on every country throughout a campaign, seeing their countries develop and going through all the turmoil and various wars that happen, then you'll want to play in an organised campaign. This procedure developed many years ago when things were organised on forums and TeamSpeaks, and continues to the present day on Discord. In contrast to say Hearts of Iron 4 campaigns, you can't sit through an entire Victoria 2 campaign in one go. You have to split it up into multiple sessions, unless you want to do a 24-hour game. Generally, this is on a weekly basis with 4 hours per session, and in those sessions you'll get through a certain amount of years of in-game time, so the amount of sessions will vary depending on how quickly you can get through the years. That depends on the speed we get through the campaign, see the speed and pausing section, and it depends on the amount of players we have, which correlates to the stability of the game. See the out of sync section for further details. It also depends on where the players agree to end the campaign. It could end after one single Great War in the 1890s, or you could continue and have multiple Great Wars into the 1920s or beyond. The end date of 1936 isn't really a problem, that can be modded out. Maybe a campaign breaks down into chaos and ends earlier, that happens quite frequently. But let's go back to the start. How is a campaign actually set up and organised in the first place? Well, it mostly happens through Discord now. As I showed you in the Finding Players section, there are many different Discords that host games. Each of them has a certain player base that they will draw their players from. When a new campaign is being planned, they will announce that sign-ups are beginning. They'll open up a channel in which the players announce that they're going to play the game and they select the potential countries they want to play. This is normally done by listing 3 or 4 countries that you'd like to play in a priority, or if you don't mind which country you get, you just type fill. Then the organisers of the campaign will put together the roster, behind the scenes usually, allocating countries to all the players who are signing up with a few different considerations in mind. One consideration is trying to give the players the countries they signed up for, trying to fill the priorities of as many players as they can. Another consideration is the balance of the campaign. They'll take into account the known skill level and experience levels of all the players and try to match up players on countries that will be rivals to each other, for example Prussia and France, trying to make those matchups fair and balanced. Another consideration is the known reliability of players. Who is known for showing up every week on time? Who is known for being unreliable and being late all the time? People who are unreliable tend to get smaller countries on a roster. New players tend to get small countries as well, as I said in the Finding Players section. Sometime before the campaign starts, the roster will be released and pinged at everyone who's in it. The amount of time before a campaign that the roster is released actually varies. Some people like to release it very soon before a campaign so they don't have time to make elaborate plans to partition each other, and so the diplomacy can take place mostly in-game. Some campaigns will release it a day or two before, and that's it. You are now contractually obliged to show up at this time every week until this campaign is over. However, very often people drop out, people can't show up, people are late, so we have the substituting procedure. When we need another player to fill in for a player who can't show up, the host will look for players who can take over that country for at least one session. Being a substitute works for a lot of people's schedules, where they can only play for one session at a time and not show up to a campaign weekly. It works well for people who had a country in the campaign but died early on, the country got annexed, and they might have already planned ahead to have the time slot for that campaign free for several weeks. Also, hosts might like to draw substitutes from the people who signed up for the campaign but didn't make it on the roster because there were too many sign-ups. Substitutes are preferably organised in advance when a player knows they will not be able to make a session, but we'll also need emergency substitutes from time to time. People who substitute on short notice are the heroes of the community. If a sub is organised in advance, the real player should give the sub orders, tell them what they should do, give them a rundown of what's going on in the campaign. This is what takes pressure off the substitute because they won't have to do their own diplomacy really, and if things go wrong they can just say, I was doing what I was told. Just one last thing to point out, which are the one session games. There are certain mods where you can just play one session, but it still involves signing up and being organised. Much more accessible and good for learning the game with low stakes. Best example is the World War I mod, then maybe a World War II mod, or the Zombie Outbreak mod Apocalypse 1836. In Victoria 2, what kicking or banning tools does a host have at their disposal? Well, when you're actually in the game, absolutely nothing. You cannot kick or ban a player from within the game itself, with one possible experimental exception in the multiplayer mods introduction section. If you need to kick a player, you will actually have to rehost, and not let that player into the rehost. But even if you could kick someone in the game, you'd either have to put them on AI or no AI, and you'd need to get a replacement for them anyway. Hosts only have the power to kick and ban players in the lobby. If you're a host in a lobby, you will notice an extra green and red button next to the name of every player. Those are the kick and ban buttons respectively. The kick will remove a player from the lobby and provide a text message in the chat saying X player was kicked from the game. The ban will remove a player from the lobby and not allow them to rejoin that lobby, but only that specific lobby. If the lobby is rehosted, all the bans are lifted. The kick button is also found in this halfway house between the lobby and the game. This is your last chance to get those troublemakers out of your game. This particular kick button is used frequently to kick people who have been stuck in the lobby. See the stuck in the lobby section for more details. Anyone kicked from this menu will become an AI country in the game. The real discipline and the real kicking and banning has to take place on the third party that we're using to communicate, such as, mostly, Discord. If someone actively has to be ejected, then they will be kicked from the Discord voice chat. Their role that gives them access to all the game channels will be removed, and the game will be rehosted and probably a replacement player found for the country that the offender was on. Unfortunately, once someone has the IP address, you can't really erase that from their memory, or the fact that the last IP address you used to join a game is saved in that box. In the rehost lobby, if that person actually tries to join back on their real username, they'll just get kicked or banned from that lobby, and it's pretty obvious whenever someone who just got kicked attempts to join back with a fake name. But having said that, the Victoria 2 multiplayer community has to run on a degree of good faith, because let's say one of the most important great powers of the world had to be kicked from the game for breaking rules. This causes massive instability and balance issues for the game, and it causes us to have to find a new player and rehost, which is always frustrating, especially when you could have avoided it. So it's better to not go through that, and it's better to take the player who's been breaking rules and try and bring them back into the fold, get people to calm down. Avoiding bad situations like this in the future is one of the considerations to make when creating a roster for a campaign. Maybe you don't want to allow people to play it in the first place who have a propensity to act like children or break the rules all the time. But the community isn't that big, so beggars can't be choosers. At the end of the day, it comes down to people skills, let's face it. When you actually get the game going, the host is the only person in control of the game's speed. If every player could control that, I wouldn't be talking to you now because there would be no such thing as a Victoria 2 multiplayer community. The speed that we tend to run in games depends on a lot of different factors. You'll absolutely never see speed 5, speed 4 is incredibly rare. I suppose it's quite possible in a game with a small amount of players. In the size of games that I play, which is on average about 18 to 25 players, speed 3 is the highest that we can reliably ever run the game on, but speed 2 is by far the most common. What often happens is we try to run on speed 3, but the person in the lobby with the worst connection will always lag us behind down to speed 2. See the lagging behind section for further details. Whenever there is a war going on with micromanagement, we play on speed 1. This is obviously to give the players more time to micromanage. It's fairer for both sides. In times during an ongoing war where there isn't really much micromanagement or fighting going on, we can put the game up to speed 2 or even 3. Between all the different wars going on and people lagging the game behind, the host actually has to pay quite close attention to the speed, and they're often reminded to put the speed up after it's been put down to speed 1 for whatever reason. While the 2 speed control buttons are greyed out for everyone who isn't the host, every player has the power to pause the game by clicking anywhere on this entire box that contains the date. Unfortunately, you cannot use spacebar, which is a feature that so many people were crying out for that they added it to Victoria 3. When any player pauses the game, including the host, this starts a 30-second timer, and it tells everyone who paused the game, thankfully. When it comes to pausing the game, the host has absolutely no more powers than anyone else. Anyone can pause the game. When this 30-second timer is going, only the player who paused the game can unpause it, which sounds absurd, and it is. So it can easily be, and has so many times been abused to disrupt the game when someone isn't getting their way. After the 30-second timer is up, anyone can unpause the game, but the person who paused it can just pause it again. But since we know who paused the game, if anyone abuses it, they can be punished. The good side of this is that anyone has the power to pause the game to call out a rule break or call out something unjust that's going on. For example, if someone multi-province retreats against you, you can pause the game and it's there for everyone to see and they can't get away with it. And in all the rule sets that I've ever played under, if you're declaring a war, you have to pause the game to announce it. I just wish the host had an override on that 30-second timer. Another way that pausing the game can often be abused is to micromanage. There cannot be a clear rule on when that's allowed, and if one player gets to do it, then surely so can everyone else. And if people constantly did it, the game would never progress. So it's really frowned upon. Yet it's not really serious enough of an offence to warrant ever kicking a player unless it's ridiculously abused. It's something that I will openly admit to doing from time to time when I feel like I really need it, like when I'm up against multiple players at the same time, and I think most players have done it at one point or another, but there are some people who abuse it the most and get known for it. Overall, the pausing system in Victoria 2 multiplayer is pretty bad, but they didn't exactly improve it in the sequel, which applies to almost everything about Victoria 2. Alright, how do players in Victoria 2 multiplayer communicate with each other? First of all, the in-game chat. This is a really good and underrated feature in Victoria 2 multiplayer, but the problem with it, which is something that they fixed in Europa Universalis 4 and Hearts of Iron 4, is the fact that messages disappear over time or when they get pushed out of the chat by new messages, and you can't scroll back to read past messages. So first of all, game messages will appear in the chat in the form of an automated message by the host. For example, when a player is lagging behind, or when a player leaves the game. The chat is accessed in a panel on the bottom left of your screen, which you can open by pressing tab. This chat also functions as a list of all the players. There's no player map mode in Victoria 2, so this is the place where you can actually see every country that has a player on it and their name. So you write a message in there, press enter, and it'll appear on the top left in the chat, and as a pop-up if that's in your notification settings. See the notification settings for further details. But you can select specific countries to send the messages to, and that's what all the buttons on the left are for. By default, all the flags are in colour, which means they're all selected, so if you send a message it'll go to all of them. If you click on one person's flag, it will deselect them, so they will no longer see any messages you send. If you click the button that says none, that will deselect every country, and then you can select the specific country, highlight them, and that's how you send a message to one individual player, or a group of any number of players, which is very useful for negotiating and stuff. Private chat messages that you can see will appear with an asterisk next to the name of the country. This is how you differentiate between a message sent to everyone or a message sent to specific people. This doesn't just mean that it's only a private message sent to you. If you deselect any number of countries in the chat menu and then send a message, the asterisk will appear. So it could be a private one to you or a private one to 5 people. If the message is sent to everyone, then there's no asterisk. Not a lot of people know that. A funny example of people getting this wrong is when they need to type us and they only send it to one player. See the synchronization section for further details. Also, there is a chat in the lobby, and there's a chat in the connecting screen between the lobby and the game, the halfway house as I like to call it. This chat window is controversial because there's a belief in the Victoria 2 community that typing in it causes instability errors like going out of sync or crashing. There is no actual evidence for any of this. This poor little useless chat has just been scapegoated. But the fact is, the chat is useless. You're only ever in here for a few seconds, so there's no point typing in it anyway, unless you're the host telling everyone that we're rehosting, because someone got stuck in the lobby. As you've probably gathered from previous sections in this video, Victoria 2 campaigns are mainly organised on Discord. Used to be TeamSpeak, might have even been Skype at some point. The section of the Discord server in which the Vic 2 game is being hosted will have many voice channels. It's almost pointless to join any of these Vic 2 games if you don't have a microphone or can't speak. When the session starts and the game is being set up, every player should probably be in the same voice chat. Then you can split off into different channels based on geographic location, alliances, private negotiations, and so on. It's great. Of course, Discord doesn't just allow for a voice chat during games, it also allows many text chats to discuss Victoria 2 mods, rules, everything about the games, allow players to argue, discuss political extremism, and channels that contain all the rules and the mods and everything you need. Pings are obviously used to get people into the games on time and announce when a new game is starting. I personally believe in a lot of microphone etiquette. People shouldn't breathe into their microphones, they shouldn't cough into them, they shouldn't discuss random crap when people are fighting an important war, but that's an uphill battle and we're still a long way off that. But one thing that should seriously never happen is talking over the host, especially when they're discussing important game information. To conclude this topic, the in-game text chat and the third-party voice chat work beautifully well together. They each have a time and a place for certain types of communication. Everyone uses both of them throughout Victoria 2 multiplayer simultaneously, and I suspect that that is exactly the same in other Paradox titles such as Europa Universalis 4 and Hearts of Iron 4. If you're into those two games, I hope you realise they're coming for you next. Dualboxing? What does this even mean? Is it related to hugboxing? This is when someone runs two different instances of Victoria 2 and connects to the same multiplayer lobby under two different names. It's possible to have Victoria 2 running twice on your computer. This isn't a malicious thing, this is actually a utility that we sometimes have to use for game stability reasons. So why would someone ever have to play two countries in the same multiplayer game? This is usually done as a temporary thing to prevent a country from being controlled by the AI, and either we don't want to or aren't able to get a substitute to take over that country and play it. So for example, if we're rehosting and someone goes AFK, or if we're at the start of a session and someone hasn't shown up, someone might hop on a Dualbox and go temporarily on that country. For small countries we normally don't bother doing this, but for big countries, great powers, we don't want the AI to go around declaring war on everyone, ruining the world economy and joining random crises. The Dualboxer could actually play the country, or they could just leave it. Or we can actually have the Dualbox leave the game and put the country on no AI. Every time a player leaves an ongoing multiplayer game, the host will have the option to put them on AI or no AI. No AI means nothing is controlling a country, it'll just be frozen. That's always preferable. So a Dualbox is a nice helpful temporary thing to get through instability problems or unreliability problems in a campaign. As a little side note, a similar thing co-oping, having two players on the same country playing it together, is really glitchy. I would never recommend doing it. It can actually lead to the horrifying prospect of a country being controlled by a player and the AI at the same time. If one of the players gets stuck in the lobby, or crashes when loading into the game, or if they leave during the game when the host selects AI, one of the players that was on that country becomes an AI and shares it with the other player. We don't need co-ops. Hoi 4 players need 4 co-ops to micro one front. Victoria 2 players can single-handedly micromanage 5 fronts in a navy. We don't need to worry about it. I'm going to provide you an overview of multiplayer mods. That is, any Victoria 2 mod that has features specifically designed for multiplayer. There's a lot of different ones and a lot of different features. Modding in the Victoria 2 multiplayer community has gone off and made wide-ranging changes, lots of crazy stuff. Some individual mods could be the topic for a whole video explaining them, but I'm just going to give you an introduction and explain why vanilla Victoria 2 is pretty much unplayable in multiplayer and the basic level of changes that you need to have in a mod. Firstly, on a practical level, my recommendation for the most basic, simple multiplayer mod that adds the bare minimum of changes is a mod called Alstat, which is linked in the description. In typical multiplayer community fashion, even this mod has lots of different versions that add different things. The one I'm providing is the basic branch of it. Right next to the channel on my Discord where I show Victoria 2 multiplayer communities, I have a channel showing various mods, focusing on ones that I've played in my streams and videos, and it includes many multiplayer mods, including different versions of Alstat and Igor PUR by Nurserino that I showed at the start of this section. The best example of an absolute bare minimum change that a mod needs to make is the removal of the jingoism requirement to add war goals. In vanilla Victoria 2, a certain percentage of your population needs to support the issue of jingoism for you to actually be able to add a new war goal in an ongoing war. That is a terrible mechanic that ties something that should be down to player agency down to a weird little pop mechanic that you do have some sway over but not much control over. It's like playing Victoria 3. Another example in vanilla is if you use a liberate country casus belli, the cores of the target country over that land that they used to have will be lost. A big strategy in multiplayer as Germany or Austria is to liberate Ukraine from Russia to weaken them. If this happens, Russia loses its cores wars over that land. This makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Russia to ever take all that back. A big positive attraction about Victoria 2 multiplayer is that you can make comebacks and recover after big defeats. Retaining cores on land that you've lost maintains a hope that you can take it back someday. But the Liberate Country casus belli removing these cores really hinders the possibility of a comeback and increases the possibility of a rage quit. In single player, the containment casus belli at 25 infamy works pretty well for keeping players from going too far, but nobody enforces containment in multiplayer, so another really useful addition for balance is the sanctions modifier at 32.5 infamy. This seriously harms your country, so it stops players from going absolutely crazy with conquests. Then there are two very important utilities that a multiplayer mod should add. Firstly, a land transfer casus belli. This is a way for one country to just give land to another for free without using a real casus belli that would use infamy, have a prestige effect, or give a truce. This is very important for multiplayer freedom and player agency to negotiate and transfer land, make agreements. The other main utility is to send money. The only way to do that within normal game mechanics is war subsidies, but these are very limited. They only give a certain amount based on budget limitations within the country you're giving them to, and obviously it can only be given to them if they're at war. And furthermore, they glitch out in multiplayer. If you start sending war subsidies to someone and then there's a rehost, when you get back in the game that money is not being given to them anymore, even though it still says sending war subsidies. A very common feature throughout multiplayer mods is the grants system. You'll have two extra decisions in your decisions window. One of them is to request a grant, and the other one is to enable or disable receiving grant requests. If you have it enabled, anytime someone requests a grant, you'll receive a pop-up asking how much money you want to give them. Obviously, a very necessary addition to multiplayer that adds player freedom to give each other money and for negotiations and deals. I'm actually going to mention some of the more advanced, recently made utilities that have started to be added to Victoria 2 mods. This is the cutting edge of Victoria 2 modding now as of when this video was made. Zombie would be very sad if I didn't mention these. In the kicking and banning section, I said that you can't kick or ban players from in-game. So first of all, Zombie actually created a decision that kicks a player. Well, first of all, the host has to take a decision which identifies him as the host country, giving him access to host decisions. How does the decision to kick a player work? It forces their game to crash. I'm personally a little bit iffy on the ethics of this, making someone else's game crash. Has science gone too far? Are we playing God? It should be the Oos gods who decide who crashes. Is this a form of hacking? And you're going to have to rehost to get a new player on it anyway. These decisions to give a player infamy or give them the debilitating modifier of sanctions are much more useful for punishments. A much more useful utility that's been added within all these massive experimental changes is the option for the host to fully unsiege a country or siege a country, which helps at the end of a war to allow players to add war goals where necessary. If you're massively sieged down by the enemy in a war, but they surrender or come to a peace deal, you're not going to be able to add war goals, because the war's not going well enough according to what the game thinks, even though the real situation of a war among the players and player agency has a different view. But most Victoria 2 multiplayer related modding takes place within the optional stuff. Tweaks to the economy, tweaks to soldier unit stats. There are always intense discussions on the best way to go with these things. It's very complicated, especially with the economy. New player advice is to check the change logs for the mods you're going to use, ask questions to the mod makers, they'll always be happy to help. Just play the game and learn as you go along. If you ever play a multiplayer game with these advanced host decisions, please don't select the host decision for yourself and then kick all the players. Rules in Victoria 2 multiplayer, here we go. I'm going to introduce you to the concept, but I only have the time in this video to explain to you a couple of examples of rules that would illustrate how they work in general, and also introduce and explain the concept of rule lawyering. Victoria 2 was clearly never designed for the level of multiplayer that we have and the complexities of what we do in it, and the game was a sort of passion project that was made in a very small amount of time. They couldn't possibly have foreseen how players would interact with each other in an environment where they're in serious competition with each other and vying for every little advantage. Well, even if they did imagine a playstyle like that, they never tested it. So while this playstyle of Victoria 2 that was unintended by the developers has turned out to be amazing, you need to have some rules in place to prevent things from being abused. One of the best and most notorious examples to show this is the army exploit of multi-province retreating, where if you're losing a battle you can sort of escape the consequences of that and get your army out of there unscathed. By retreating it to the opposite end of your country, the enemy cannot follow up on you, your army becomes invulnerable. War in Victoria 2 would become a complete farce if we didn't enforce this. An example of just a general mechanical exploit, which is the unfortunate unintended consequence of a few different mechanics coming together, is the very well-known method of rushing for the healthcare reform. What does healthcare provide? Pop growth. What's the most important thing in Victoria 2? Your number of pops. How do you get reforms? By your people being angry. How can you make your people angry? By getting fully sieged down and declining peace deals that give you +1 militancy. How can you get fully sieged down? By declaring war on an AI and holding your armies back, when you could easily win, or fighting against other players and not surrendering. Banning players from doing certain things is absolutely mandatory to have a fair, enjoyable Victoria 2 multiplayer experience. Different Victoria 2 multiplayer communities, different campaigns, all have different rule sets. Some of them are just rewordings of pretty much the same rule, but some of them will actually be different from other campaigns. If you're a new player, it's very important to read the rules of any campaign that you're going into, and ask about any rules you don't understand. The exploit that I showed you to get healthcare reforms is banned under a general rule known as nation ruining, which is intentionally damaging your own country in exchange for some direct or indirect benefit, or just doing it out of pure rage. Even if nation ruining isn't explicitly mentioned in a rule set, it is such a widely known concept in the Victoria 2 multiplayer community, it's almost an unwritten rule, you can't do that. It would also fall under what many rule sets have as a general no exploits policy. To have an individual rule for each individual exploit in Victoria 2 would require writing a ridiculously huge document, even bigger than the Reno rules. So what many hosts do is have a wide-ranging rule against exploits. If someone carried out that healthcare reform exploit, it would be noticed and dealt with pretty easily. The cliched interaction between the host and the player is that the player says, well, there isn't a specific rule about it, so I can do it. And the host says, you know it's an exploit, don't do it. Then the host uses Zombie's kick decision to make that player's game crash. That little typical interaction is an example of what we call, in Victoria 2 multiplayer, rule lawyering. Take away law and replace it with Victoria 2 multiplayer rules. Take away lawyer and replace it with potentially any player. Take away judge and replace it with GM or host. Take away jail sentence and replace it with a slightly more disadvantageous position among the pixels on your screen. You could say that rule lawyering means any dispute about rules ever in Victoria 2 multiplayer, but in my opinion it actually has negative connotations and it sort of means doing it in bad faith. For example, in one campaign a rule might benefit you, so you argue very hard for enforcing it by the letter. Then in a different campaign it might go against you, so you argue for the complete opposite when it suits you. Actually, those could happen within the same campaign. To truly be a rule lawyer is to take the rules of a Victoria 2 campaign and use them as you would any game mechanic against the other players to your advantage. If you think that rule lawyering is just cynical, stupid bickering, many Victoria 2 campaigns don't actually bother with this. These are campaigns with smaller rule sets, and it's more down to just trusting players to behave better overall and dealing more with unwritten rules or broad rules against exploits. The smaller rule set might actually be harder for new players because these games actually involve a lot of past precedent, which is learned and acquired through playing previous campaigns with them rather than being written. In my experience, the smaller rule set either requires a general attitude of good faith among all the players, and a lot of common sense as to what is reasonable and not reasonable, and or a really tough host who will clamp down on stuff, prevent any rule lawyering and bickering, and doesn't accept very much in the way of arguing back against their rulings. And the standard of, if you need to ask yourself, is this an exploit? It's probably an exploit, is a pretty good standard. The bigger rule set is really hard to learn, and there's a lot of complicated procedures in a game that's already complicated enough, but it's all actually there written down for you. But the bottom line is, as a new player, I hope I've prepared you for this. Explaining specific rules is something I can do in further videos, but I also have many explanations of rules within Victoria 2 multiplayer videos I've already done. Some videos are even pretty much based on disputes about rules, so if you want more than this overview and this introduction, check out some of my other videos. The first thing you should know is that Vic 2 will sometimes just crash, with no particular reason or thing you could have done to prevent that, which is why you should always have monthly autosaves on in preparation for reverting to the nearest save. In terms of random crashing, it could happen to any player. It could happen to just the host, in which case, for every other player, the game timer will just get stuck on whatever day the host crashed on, and eventually you'll get a pop-up saying server lost. One of the players should then take a save, send it to the host, and then a rehost will happen. Crashing is inevitable after a desync occurs. There'll be a lot more details of that in the out of sync section. In that section, there's also going to be details on the procedure for what happens when someone crashes. Probably the most notorious form of crashing is an entire lobby crash. When there's an entire lobby crash, your game will just appear to close. It doesn't even stop responding and then crash, it just closes. And the chances of it happening later into a campaign are larger as the save game increases in size and complexity. There are some things that you can do or attempt to do in game that will cause crashes. First of all, never read the newspaper. Just don't do it, ever, in multiplayer. Is that clear? Good. Trying to swap out the general on a stack when it's already in a battle will cause your game to immediately crash. When you swap a general during a war, you'll get an extra pop-up asking you to confirm, telling you that you're actually going to lose prestige for this. If your stack actually arrives in the battle before you confirm, it will attempt to assign the general to a stack that's in a battle, which is impossible. The following one is actually hard to pull off. This is splitting a stack of units as it arrives in a province. Dempsey explains it better than I can, so hopefully this makes sense. If this is the case, then it means the game will crash less if the host and the players in general have better internet internet and better ping. As you can see, the best I could pull off is a visual glitch where the unit doesn't look like it's moving. Very importantly, these things apply to navies, so if you're rapidly splitting a navy to try and encircle someone, this could happen. Also, attempting to tab out of the game while it's running in multiplayer, but only in full screen mode, can make you crash, and that kind of full screen tabbing back in crash can be devastating. The Victoria 2 window can sort of become stuck there, and you can't even close it with Task Manager. That just highlights the importance of windowed borderless, so go back to that section if you haven't watched it. The source of every different crash is something that requires more research within the Vic 2 community, but as a new player you just need to be prepared for the random crashing and to avoid the couple of accidental crashes that I've mentioned. I'll go a lot more into the general procedure for what we do when people crash in the out of sync section. So now we turn to the infamous problem of getting stuck in the lobby. This is an issue that arises before the game actually starts, when all the players are in the lobby ready to go on their countries. This can happen. Getting stuck in the lobby is when the game starts, but you don't start with it. The victim will still remain in a multiplayer lobby with everyone there on their countries while everyone else has started the game. The player who's stuck in the lobby will just not load into the game, but their name and country will still show up in this menu. They just will never actually load because they're not really there, and their flag will be in black and white, meaning if it's Prussia that got stuck in the lobby, it's really hard to tell. If someone crashes while loading from the lobby into the game, it'll be effectively the same, and the host will have the option to kick them and then continue with everyone else, but it usually leads to a rehost because we need every country to be in the game. Also, any countries that do get kicked at this point will become AI controlled, which you normally really don't want, because they'll ruin your country. Furthermore, if you get stuck in the lobby and then there's a rehost and you rejoin it, you might experience what's called a ghost lobby, where for you the multiplayer game will actually start even though the host hasn't started it. So it's the exact inverse of getting stuck in the lobby. I'm almost certain that the ghost lobby is caused by not restarting your game completely after being stuck in the lobby. Getting stuck in the lobby is the one rare case in which you should actually close your game completely after not actually loading into the game yet, just being in lobbies and menus. Now, I'm fairly certain that the following fixes will almost completely stop you from ever being stuck in the lobby. The research isn't completely clear, but the evidence is overwhelming that this works. As you're loading into the multiplayer lobby, if you see certain visual glitches in the list of players in the lobby, there's a very high chance that you will be stuck in the lobby. If you see any of these visual glitches in the lobby, all you have to do is rejoin the lobby, and you don't have to completely close your game, just rejoin the lobby quickly. Number 1. You see on your screen that another player has not loaded the save to 100% even though they actually have. This can be easily identified by just seeing that someone's loading progress in the lobby has stopped. And you can ask everyone else if that player has in fact loaded the save, and it's just you. Just simply rejoin the multiplayer lobby and you do not need to restart your game. Number 2. You see another player above the host in the lobby. So you have to know who the host is and they should be at the top, the first player in the lobby. Simple. If you see a different player above the host, rejoin. Number 3. You see that another player has not selected their country when they in fact have. It can be difficult to identify because sometimes people have just not selected their country yet. For general lobby etiquette, everyone needs to select their country quickly after they've loaded the save, not while you're loading it, so that people can identify the visual glitch if they have it. This is the one where you'll often have to ask other players if they also see someone who hasn't selected their country. Is Ambassador on a nation for you? Everyone.
Yes,
Oh shit, I'm a read. Number 4. The number of players stated in the lobby window doesn't correspond correctly to the actual amount of players in the lobby. The host will know the amount of players that should be in the lobby, for example 29. This is how the host knows if they've got all the players in and they're ready to start the game anyway. So after all the players have joined the lobby and the host and most players are reporting a number, if for any player that number is different, they should rejoin. Nurse Reno coined the term the checks, the number of which has actually varied based on how many we've actually known and identified over the years. It's mostly been known as the 3 checks because the 4th one I just gave you about the number of players in the lobby is a bit less common and known. So whenever you go into a Victoria 2 multiplayer lobby, either for the first time in a session or in any rehost, keep an eye on the players window, scroll through it every so often to do your checks. The host and the player should always be communicating to make sure no one gets stuck in the lobby during this time. Certain multiplayer mods have actually inscribed the 3 checks in the multiplayer lobby to help us all. Maybe they need to include the 4th one as well. But if you're not privileged enough to be playing in one of these great mods, hopefully you'll be ready after my explanation. Another glitch that you can get within the lobby before you've even started the game is the infamous grey map. This issue will most commonly be found in the later years of a campaign after many multiplayer sessions have passed by, and every player downloading the save in the multiplayer lobby will get this. If this glitch happens, it happens to everyone. This is an issue caused by the save game's file becoming very large, as all the pops, numbers, calculations have become more complex and numerous later into a campaign. The save game file that you download from the host in the multiplayer lobby will become sort of corrupted. The entire map will be great and you will not be able to select a country in the lobby. But this is not a catastrophic problem. The actual save that the host has is not corrupted itself, it's just your download. This issue can be fixed by a simple, if a little bit tedious workaround of downloading the save manually every time. If you already attempted to download the save and you have a file already in your save games folder, just overwrite that with the save that you downloaded manually. If you join the multiplayer lobby while having the correct manually downloaded save in your folder, you will not get this glitch anymore, it'll be fine. So the fix is easy, but downloading the save manually can contribute to late game burnout and the death of a campaign, unfortunately. Nurse Reno enforces a policy of downloading the save manually for every rehost in his campaigns. This seems very drastic and it's very annoying to do, but it might actually improve stability, especially in the lobby when you do your checks, because a lot of those glitches are associated with downloading the save in the lobby. More research is needed to see if this actually correlates with stability. Also, just as a side note, if you're using a mod that is already very big and complex, for example CWE, you can get this grey map glitch much earlier into a campaign. As a further useless side note, I've seen cases where you get the grey map glitch, download the save manually, and then you go into the game during a Great War, and enough pops die during the Great War that the save game shrinks to be the size where it doesn't get the glitch anymore. Anyway. The next lobby problem is the TCP error. There are two forms of this error. The first form is a severe problem that means you cannot host, and the second version is a minor problem that you can fix just by rejoining usually. The severe version of this problem can be identified by just constant TCP errors whenever anyone tries to join your lobby. It's pretty obvious when this happens. If you're getting severe and recurring TCP errors, this means that there's a problem with your port forwarding. Back in the port forwarding section, I said you had to open UDP and TCP for the relevant ports. This could mean that you have not opened TCP, but if you have opened the TCP ports and you're sure of it and you're still getting this, there is just a severe problem and you can't host, unfortunately. That's rare though. Allowing Victoria 2 through your firewall might fix it. The less serious version of this problem is the occasional TCP error message when someone joins your lobby and attempts to download the save. It might happen once or twice, it might happen for one individual who's trying to join, and if people have already joined and loaded the save, this means it isn't the severe version of the problem, by the way. So for small TCP errors, you can just rejoin the lobby, the host can rehost the lobby, players who are seemingly unable to download the save in the lobby can download the save manually, putting it in their save games folder as I've outlined. This problem, which you can get while the game is actually running and time is progressing forward, is an error message that will come up in the top left in-game chat in the form of a message by the host. It will say X player is lagging behind, decreasing game speed. This shows when an individual player is having issues with connection, and when this message comes up, the speed of the game will drop down by 1. For example, if you're on 3 speed, it will drop down to 2 with one of these messages, and if you're already on 1 speed, the game will actually pause. A rare case of Victoria 2 having a built-in failsafe for connection issues. But yeah, this is just a really simple internet connection issue. The player who causes the lagging behind message is the one who needs to sort out their internet, close other applications on your computer, tell family members to stop using the internet, and if it's a really bad repeat problem, you're going to have to leave the game. If multiple people get this error message and it spams them in the chat, this is a host problem with bad connection to multiple players. This can also happen due to computer issues, so for example, if my computer sort of freezes a little bit or stutters, I can't load what's happening in the multiplayer game, so I will get this lagging behind message. If you hover over the date, you can actually see the date that every player in the game is on, so you can see if someone is actually far behind and not caught up with events. That's why the game has a built-in failsafe to slow down, to let these people catch up. Now we move on to talking about the elephant in the room, the part of the video that everyone's been waiting for, synchronization, or a lack thereof. This section also contains general advice and procedures for all forms of instability and particularly crashing as well. So this is going out of sync, OOS, OOS for short. This is an error that can happen while the Victoria 2 multiplayer game is in progress, when time is going forward. Sometimes one player, 2 players, or any number of players will get this error message on the screen saying the game is no longer in sync, and that will pause the game. This can happen at any time. It can happen as soon as you unpause unpause the game after a rehost in what is called an instant OOS. So any player that goes out of sync will still be in the game, it's not going to disconnect them, and you can even unpause the game and continue. However, the people who are out of sync will increasingly see things differ from what is actually happening. The OOS people will start to see different numbers, they'll see different movements of armies for example, until eventually at one point they will crash. Alternatively, quite often, someone going out of sync can cause the host to crash. Going out of sync is a one-way ticket towards crashing or rehosting one way or another eventually. Now you know what happens when a player or players go out of sync. I will now explain the general procedure that we have in the Victoria 2 multiplayer community to deal with this, and it generally applies to large multiplayer lobbies. If you're just with 1 or 2 people, it's a lot easier to deal with. So this is what we do to keep the campaign going as quickly as possible and just get past the desyncs. I need to make it absolutely clear desyncs will happen, and the best thing to do is just follow the procedure, the less complaining the better, and just get through it. So if you go out of sync, what you should do is type OOS in the in-game chat. This informs the host, this informs the entire lobby that you have gone out of sync. This means that the host can decide if we need to rehost immediately. If it's a mass OOS and loads of people have gone out of sync, the host will definitely decide to rehost, but if 1 or 2 people go out of sync, you might not need to rehost yet. What you should absolutely never do is leave the game unless the host says rehost in the chat or tells you by voice. So if someone else goes out of sync, do not assume that this is going to lead to an immediate rehost. Do not leave the game yet. If a player goes out of sync and they're not actively doing anything very important, so they're not fighting a war or something, the campaign can just continue, and it's up to the host to decide that based on the context of what's going on in the game. If it's possible for the game to continue for a little while, then the person who is out of sync just has to deal with that. When you're out of sync, you can actually still play the game, and moves that you make will still generally happen for the rest of the players. It's just that what you see will be different. This is why you should unpause the game immediately, or else we'll be stuck for an extra 30 seconds, wasting even more time. That's why I left a space there. You should type OOS and then unpause the game. Of course, eventually the end point of the procedure is to rehost when the situation becomes untenable, and you'll just immediately rehost if loads of people go out of sync. You can only continue if the number of people is minimal, like 1 or 2. If you subsequently crash from going out of sync, or just crash in general, as I mentioned in a previous section, the host will get the option to replace you with AI or leave your country on no AI. The procedure always involves putting the country on no AI, which essentially pauses your country, meaning that the AI will not take over and ruin everything you've done, it will just stay there as you left it. If we need that country in the game urgently, we'll rehost. For example, if someone declares war on you after you've crashed. This is all just done to maximise the playtime we get and minimise the disruption caused by ooses and crashes. It's the best we can do. If you go out of sync or crash and the host decides to continue the game for a little while without you, I understand that that's very frustrating. It's happened to me before. You're just going to have to deal with it, unfortunately. It has to happen for the health of the game. If you're sitting there in the Discord voice chat after having crashed, another player can stream the game for you and you can watch that. As for the technical side of this and any supposed fixes for going out of sync, over all the years of Victoria 2 multiplayer, we've tried to find a problem, we've tried to look for correlations, people have developed superstitions, we've tried to identify exactly what we were doing when we went out of sync to see if that caused it, but there really is nothing apart from a general rough correlation with the overall quality of the players and the host's internet. It seems to happen more to people with bad internet, although people with really good internet will still go out of sync, so it's not an inherent problem with your internet. And also it's correlated to the amount of players in the game naturally, so the more players you have in a multiplayer lobby, the more instability there will be. But since the Victoria 2 multiplayer community is already so numb to the problem of oosing, we're more than willing to play games with higher amounts of players, and we'll just deal with it as a trade-off for enjoying a game with more players that has more options in diverse countries. This is simply an intrinsic problem in Vic 2 multiplayer, and for that matter every other multiplayer and every other Paradox game. It's Paradox's netcode, it's a skill issue on their part. You might be inclined to think that it's just because Victoria 2 is an old game. People say, well, the game's really old, that's why we have to deal with this. But that's a fallacy. There are even older games that have stable multiplayer made by other companies, and there are games that are bigger and have more numbers and more complexity that don't go out of sync all the time. And there are Paradox games that came out long after this, including Victoria 3, that have exactly the same problems, if not worse. And it still happens despite these multiplayers having servers rather than the Victoria 2 peer-to-peer connection. It's because of Paradox's inability to make functioning multiplayer, simple as, and it's particularly frustrating because these games have the most potential for multiplayer, especially Vic 2. If you want to play Victoria 2 multiplayer, it's something you're going to have to deal with, and you have to just follow the procedure and get on with it. It's a trade-off that we all accept to enjoy the good things about multiplayer. It speaks to the very human condition. For example, as humans we spend roughly 1/3 1/3 of our lives sleeping. On the face of it, this is a complete waste of time. It's unproductive, you're not doing anything. But there's no avoiding it, you just have to get through it and deal with it and find a good procedure for it. People who play Victoria 2 multiplayer probably spend about 1/3 of their time rehosting. It's exactly the same, absolutely no difference. If you want to live, you have to sleep. If you want to do Vic 2 multiplayer, you have to rehost. By playing, you're accepting that you have to deal with it, so don't even bother complaining about it. I always express a bit of frustration whenever it happens, especially if something interesting was actively going on, but playing the blame game or getting mad at it too long is just a complete waste of time and energy. It's like getting angry at the weather. Now, Victoria 2 is absolutely full of bugs and glitches, but there's one that I'd like to highlight in particular here, the crisis glitch, because if you don't know how to fix this, the only workaround is to revert to a save before the crisis happened. That could be really bad, and it's avoidable. From my experience, a ridiculously high percentage of all crises that happen in Vic 2 multiplayer end up with this glitch, unless of course you're playing a mod that disables them, because they're not that great in multiplayer anyway as a game mechanic. What happens is, as the crisis is going through the Great Powers asking them if they want to join it, sometimes the Great Power in question just doesn't get the pop-up. The main reason for that is actually being out of sync, so for desynchronized people the crisis might not even be happening, let alone getting a pop-up to ask them if they want to join it. When you do get a crisis pop-up, please accept or decline it as soon as possible. I'm not 100% sure if the crisis glitch happens due to a Great Power taking too long and holding the decision, but they're so buggy that you're best to just get them over with as soon as possible. The result of the crisis getting stuck on a Great Power who did not get a notification is that one or both sides of the crisis will have no Great Power supporter. The crisis temperature will just reach 100% and stay there forever. While there's an ongoing crisis, the declare war button is disabled, so you can't even do a transfer war. Basically turns the game into Victoria 3, and you don't want that, so it's time to get rid of this crisis. The fix for this is to take a save and rehost, of course, and edit the save to remove the crisis. As I mentioned earlier in the monthly autosaves and saves in general section, go into your save games folder in your documents, open the relevant save game file in a text editor, Ctrl F, search for crisis_manager. Hit enter and that'll take you to the right place. Under Crisis Manager, within these two brackets, there will be all the information about the crisis. Delete everything, leave the brackets empty. And then save it as a new file. You can call it edited save or something. Just rehost the lobby on that save, and when you get in game, the crisis should be gone. There you go. Well, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. This is about as thorough as I could possibly be. It took a lot of research to make this, and a lot of help from those people that I mentioned. They took the time to answer my questions, and to watch earlier versions of the video, to point out things that I'd missed, and to correct anything that was wrong. When I got to the people who I sent the video to, who didn't have any corrections or anything I'd missed out on, then I knew the video was pretty much ready. It started out as what I thought would be a small side project, maybe a 20-minute video, maybe a half an hour video, then maybe a 40-minute video, 50 minutes, and then over an hour. I kept adding more and more things to it. Also, the final count of petty swipes at Victoria 3 was a grand total of 10. I couldn't make this video without doing those, let's face it. It was depressing to go through all the massive problems of Victoria 2 multiplayer with the knowledge that they had released a sequel to the game that did not improve on it whatsoever. I remember dealing with all the instability problems over the years in Victoria 2 with some vague hope at the back of my head that they would fix it in Victoria 3. Or even if they did go in a different direction with the game, it would at least be stable in multiplayer. You can watch my Victoria 3 multiplayer experience video that fully displays that sad reality. But the positive side is that that experience has inspired me to search for other games by other companies. For example, the Knights of Honor 2 video I did recently that was a lot of fun. But most of all, the Victoria 2 multiplayer content, the stories, they will keep coming. I linked quite a few of them in the description because they were referenced in this video. For example, the episode of the Scandinavia series that's about going out of sync, and the videos or series that showcase a lot of examples of rules. If you're new to the channel and want to watch some of my Victoria 2 content, those are as good a place to start as any. If you're a long time viewer of the channel, then maybe this tutorial will give you a newfound appreciation for all my videos, put them into better context and help you understand what's going on. Going out of sync is such an inherent part of Vic 2 multiplayer that it becomes a plot point half the time. I'm very interested to see in the comments what sort of guides you would like next. I'm sure you're itching to hear about game mechanics and multiplayer strategies, but those are very broad subjects, so I'm interested in hearing some suggestions as to how to best separate them into different categories and guides. If you want to support the channel, here's my Patreon link again. I want to really thank all my existing supporters on Patreon who greatly assist me in financially being able to make huge video projects like this where I cannot upload normally for a few weeks. You can also support the channel by using the super thanks thing and joining the channel membership that allows you to use amazing emotes in my comments. You can quite literally respond to anyone who comes into my videos to defend Victoria 3 with a sorry Jack. You should all sign up for the channel membership immediately. But anyway, I hope you all have a nice day, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.